What's going on? My name is Joe Lewis, and I practice talking on the internet. And as usual, this is brought to you by the good friends at Patreon, who you can be a part of the community as well. For $5, $7, or $10, you can join the growing community that makes sure that my bills are paid. And once again, like I mentioned, like every sort of talk, I want to thank Jane, Marking, Maru, Frackle, Liberation, Valentine, and Michael for their contributions to the Patreon. And I hope you join the community that's making sure the lights stay on. I deeply appreciate that. We're going to have to talk about Marianne Williamson. And I want to kind of frame this a little bit differently than I have in previous sort of conversations that we've had over here. As you know, like my slogan that I'm sort of like trying to create is that I practice talking on the internet. And what that means is that with every time that you see me and every time that I'm just trying to communicate, I'm trying to just better just hone that tool of communication from what my brain creates into what you guys absorb. And we do this all the time. And there's different ways that I use the term practice talking because people do give me shit for using it as a pejorative, but essentially that's what I and many others do in this internet landscape, is that we use the tools available to us to try to hone this craft of communication. And something that worries me a little bit is that I don't want to see a situation where people on the sort of what we'll say sort of like, even though the left right dichotomy is kind of nonsense, but sort of like the ideological left that exists on the internet and in like modern day politics, we can't fall for the trap of Marianne Williamson. We can't. Something that I'm very critical about when it comes to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is that he's a minister. And by virtue of him being a minister, good ministers are able to communicate clearly and energetically to an audience. And I made a tweet like a couple of weeks ago that said like praising MLK for his language and the way that he talks is like praising a chef for cooking. Where essentially it's that, of course, he's going to be very good at talking to hundreds, if not thousands of people, because the man is a minister. So his strengths as a speaker are obviously going to come out because of his experience and background as a minister. And then the question is for us is, how do we separate, like, how can we, and if we can, separate those two things? Now, Marianne Williamson is no Martin Luther King, but she is a professional communicator. This is a woman who's written multiple books about stuff and being able to communicate to an audience in such a way, and that's what she does. Like, this is what she was known for. She was platformed by Oprah Winfrey at a very early time. I want to say the earliest was like in the 90s, like 92, I want to say. And that's her MO. Her MO is being a powerful communicator. And that's not to mention she was also a pastor. So she has a extensive background of communicating to people. And by virtue of her experience of communication, whether it be her appearances on Oprah Winfrey or other talk shows, her work at the Church of Today in Michigan, or the books that she wrote, she has a lot of experience talking. And when you have a lot of experience talking and a lot of experience communicating, then you're going to have somebody who's very good at the ability to talk to people. So what we can't fall into the trap is kind of the same thing that happened with Obama, is that the current political climate is fertile ground for a smooth talker and a strong communicator to come and be the forefront for the next wave of just essentially neoliberalism. And it's like she's just another passing of that torch. And the thing that she's going to have to do is show that she is more than just somebody who is a professional speaker and communicator. She's going to have to show that not only is she able to speak in a non-liberal manner that's basically a female version of Bernie Sanders, is that she's going to have to also be the female Bernie Sanders without the political experience, but has a level of advocacy or work that is reflective of the words that she's saying. And she has to prove that. And that's going to be the hardest thing for her because she doesn't have political experience. Which again, like if you remember when she ran for the 3 to 4 months, like that was the thing that she was like heralded for a little bit, is that, oh, she's a good communicator. She's speaking the speak, but Bernie Sanders exists, and Bernie Sanders also speaks to speak and also is in Congress. So he's going to have a stronger background. So she was kind of overshadowed by Sanders and then never sort of picked up steam. But since Democrats don't really have a candidate that they're going to put up as somebody to potentially replace Joe Biden, at least not yet, and Joe Biden is just death fuel or just like, not I don't say death fuel, but he's just worthless in a lot of very particular ways. It is fertile ground for a person to come into the marketplace of ideas who is very good at talking in a non-liberal manner and sort of like spitting the non-liberal truth. And make no mistake, like this is the same woman who slid in Avatar in a conversation about tension.
You might not, I want to tell you this. I was in Israel, and I was talking to some Israeli and Palestinian peacemakers. And I said, I'm telling you the truth. I said, well, you know, the Great Mother doesn't choose sides. According to Avatar, the Great Mother doesn't choose sides. She's there to protect balance.
Yes.
She doesn't pick a winner, she protects balance. And
Yes.
do you know what the Palestinian and the Israelis in the room, do you know their reaction?
What did they say? They thought about it.
They
That's
nodded.
good.
And I think it was because some of them had seen Avatar.
And then she kind of made it like it was a flex. and I mean, if that's something you're down for, then I guess. But this is also the same woman who essentially dodged the question of like, hey, you advocate for reparations, but what business do you have of setting the number?
Many of your opponents support a commission to study the issue of reparations for slavery, but you are calling for up to $500 billion in financial assistance. What makes you qualified to determine how much is owed in reparations?
Well, first of all, it's not $500 billion in financial assistance. It's $500 billion, $200 to $500 billion, payment of a debt that is owed. That is what reparations is. We need some deep truth-telling when it comes. We don't need another commission to look at evidence. I appreciate what Congressman O'Rourke has said. It is time for us to simply realize that this country will not heal. All that a country is a collection of people. People heal when there's some deep truth-telling. We need to recognize that when it comes to the economic gap between blacks and whites in America, it does come from a great injustice that has never been dealt with. That great injustice has had to do with the fact that there was 250 years of slavery followed by another 100 years of domestic terrorism. What makes me qualified to say $200 to $500 billion? I'll tell you what makes me qualified. If you did the math of the 40 acres and a mule, given that there was 4 to 5 million slaves at the end of the Civil War, there were 4 to 5, and they were all promised 40 acres and a mule for every family of 4. If you did the math today, it would be trillions of dollars. And I believe that anything less than $100 billion is is an insult, and I believe that 200 to 500 billion is politically feasible today because so many Americans realize there is an injustice that continues to form a toxicity underneath the surface.
Just does this thing where, like, which is powerful if you're a politician, is that you talk in a way that's very smooth, very clear, very easy to understand, very accessible, that can sort of like embolden liberals in this case, because that's really the group that she's trying to target, because most people who are like non or illiberal should probably know she's full of shit. But in case you're on the fence, she's a professional speaker. So she's going to be able to say the right things. She's going to be able to frame her language in a way that's illiberal, but in a illiberal way that's still like palatable for liberals to understand. She's gonna say all the right things. That's the one thing that you're gonna not. It's the one thing you're not gonna be disappointed about with Marianne Williamson, is that she's gonna say the right things when she needs to say them. But then the question is, like, there's a lot of other political motivations that are going to happen if she were to be president. So she's going to have to prove that, like, not only is she going to have like this sweet, smooth talk, is it have the sweet, smooth talk that's going to lead to substantial change. And clearly that's doesn't exist, but it's something that possibly, because of the fertile ground of COVID, the fertile ground of the just inflation, Ukraine, all these other sort of agitators in the American political climate, that might be something that liberals might see a value that might be better than giving Joe Biden a second term. Because if there's anything that Joe Biden showed us, is that he's not a fighter. And Marianne Williamson is trying to position herself to be the fighter that we were hoping to have with Joe Biden, if you unironically believe that he was a fighter. But yeah, like, if that's, and again, like, I'm not gonna knock Variety, and I'm not going to knock Variety. I'm not going to knock the potential of people putting their hat in the ring to go up against Joe Biden, but we can't get smooth talked in our way into another worthless president the same way that we did for Obama, the same way we did for Donald Trump. It's that, like, yeah, they're like, you're going to have people who are very, very good at talking, looking at the ground in front of them, seeing that it's a little shaky, and then putting their hat in the ring and saying that, like, I have the answers. And since I speak really, really good, because I've done it for decades, then I'm going to be able to trick you to get you to go to the ballot and vote for me instead. And I don't think you should vote for Marianne Williamson personally. But hey, live your best life. But yeah, that's all I got for now. Just, I'm going to be talking a little bit about each candidate in a snippet. I'm also going to pay attention to what they do. So if you're like interested in that, feel free to pay attention to the Twitch channel, because we're going to be paying attention to the opponents that officially put their hats in the ring as competitors for the presidential election. We're going to get into more primary conversations coming up soon, because that's also coming up next year. So there's a lot that's midterms, excuse me. That's a lot that's going to be sort of like happening in the next year or so. And this is a political space, so we're going to be talking about it. But once again, thanks for coming through. If your time is short, even though this video is a little bit longer than it needs to be, is that Marianne Williamson is a professional speaker. Don't let the fact that she can talk nice and speak the illiberal game that she actually is going to be a player, because she's not. She's just really good at talking, and don't let that refreshment of somebody being good at speaking illiberally let you fall down the rabbit hole and thinking that she's a substantive candidate, because she's not. She's pretty worthless, but she's worthless in particular ways. But hey, we'll let her continue talking and just have that slowly reveal itself, right? All right, that's all I got. Have a good rest of your day, and I'll see you tomorrow.